This is Jack Donovan, author of The Way of Men, and you're listening to Start the World.
My first guest today is Pat Stedman. He's a dating relationship coach. You can find him at patstedman.com. And we're going to talk about, obviously, what he does for a living, but a lot more as well. Pat, thanks for coming on the show.
Jack, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
All right. So first, explain to everybody what you do, because I think they'll probably confuse you with like a pickup artist or something like that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a dating and relationship coach for men. And like a lot of guys, I did come through the pickup artist community initially. Mm-hmm. I think that one of the things that's very different from me is I balance that out. I've kind of like balanced the pickup manosphere world with some of the more like authenticity, kind of even straying into some of like the sort of hippie circles out. Like I'm a very curious guy. So I've had my foot in a lot of different communities over the years, and I've been trying to basically discover, this is my goal for a long time, trying to understand what attraction is in a macro level. Because you have all these different people who claim like, well, this is attractive, this isn't attractive, but often they're contradictory to each other. And yet they do seem to work for these respective groups. So I was trying to figure out what the different contexts were that something would be attractive for one group, because what they were saying was true maybe on some level. And then what another group was saying about it was true on a different level. So I've created like an integrated theory, I suppose you could say, of attraction. And aside from the work I've done with guys on dating, I'm married, and within my own relationship went down to the depths at a certain point, to the point where we were at the brink of divorce. And so I also had the benefit of seeing a relationship go down to its basically bottom and then rebuilding it from there. It's very like a holistic, I suppose you could say, idea of male-female relationships just across the spectrum, which I think is useful, because what you have a lot is guys who do dating and they get dating, but if they get a relationship, they get out of the industry entirely, or a lot of them don't get out of the industry. Or you have people who are in relationships and they never really fully understood dating. They may have gotten a relationship and that was all they knew. So I think it's been kind of good for me that I've had this balanced experience. So yeah, I help guys with it. And I guess you could say I'm mostly based in the corner of the manosphere these days, but kind of do a little bit of my own thing there.
Right. I mean, what do guys come to you for? I mean, can you give me some examples?
Yeah, well, Jack, it ranges the spectrum. So you have guys, sort of classic story, guy has a hard time going up and approaching girls, meeting women, gets very much in his head. So I'll address that on a tactical level, but one of the things that I do that I think quite well is doing a lot of deep psychology work and dealing with limiting beliefs and just basically bad mental patterns. Like every new client that comes in the door, we get on a 3-hour call. And we go through their entire life history, relationship with parents. And you find a lot that these guys, they have issues with their fathers, which holds back their deeper self-esteem and orientation around women. So you have some of that. You have guys who are in relationships and the relationship is just on the rocks, kind of falling down to they're near the point of divorce, very unsatisfying dynamic. And so for those guys, it's basically one of the prerequisites of working with a guy in that situation is that you're not there to save the marriage, because that's not the mindset you want to have.
Right.
But you're basically trying to get the relationship you want, and maybe it's with that woman, maybe it's not, but that's the objective in mind. So if they agree to that they're willing to perhaps lose it, then we work on that and building up their frame and really putting the negotiating pressure, I suppose you could say, within the relationship to shift it. And often, in a lot of cases, this is helping to heal the woman they're with who is acting bad because she has a lot of bad psychological patterns herself. So it's acting a lot as a leader, not just like it's about me. And then you have guys who actually have like pretty good dating lives, but they have a hard time finding a girl who is really like quality that they want to be with. And so a lot of that is like standard tweaking and helping their discernment. And yeah, I mean, guy recently about issues with their sex life. Relationship was otherwise really good, but you know, basically he was losing interest in the sexual dynamics of the relationship. So then you get into like Madonna horror complex stuff. It's really, really interesting. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's always new layers. This is why I like the job.
Yeah, no, that actually does sound really interesting. It sounds like you really help people. Have you had a lot of success stories?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I 9 out of 10 clients are really, really satisfied with what's going on. And, you know, I think I've only had like maybe 3 or 4 out of like the 100 plus I've been working with that, you know, I would say that maybe they weren't super happy with stuff. And honestly, you know, how it usually is with like a bad client, it's usually more about, you know, my screening process of working with them.
Right.
I would say there's only one guy who I feel like I could have done a little bit of a better job with. So, and
Right.
you're learning over time, right? That's how it is.
Yeah, no doubt. I actually, I didn't tell you this beforehand, but I have Tanner actually life coaching me right now.
Oh yeah,
which is kind of funny, you know. Like, but I was like, I needed a Mormon on my shoulder. I need.
you guys. When I saw you guys in person, you have a great rapport.
No, totally. I mean, who knows? He might not even be authoritarian enough to be my boss because we just talk on the phone and have so much fun. But you know, like he's looking at my schedule and be like, "What you do today, Jack? You know, keep me on track." No, because I need that. I'm out in the country. I have no boss, so I need a boss. Everybody needs a boss sometimes, you know. So, but yeah, I think that's really addresses a lot of problems that a lot of men are running into, whether it's needing a boss or just needing a coach with something. And like what you deal with, there used to be rules for how relationships work and how everything worked. And everyone you're going to deal with is negotiating a world where there are no rules. Like all the rules are constantly changing. And so there's new problems for you to deal with all the time.
Yeah.
But, you know, so, I mean, I think a coach for many people is going to be really helpful because it's not like you can ask your dad necessarily, or, you know, the old, like, you know, how do I go a courting is not really, you know, a thing.
I mean, honestly, one of the things that I've come to realize just in the last couple of months is that so much of what my role is, and this is including, interestingly enough, very often for guys who are older than me, is like being a father. And this is why so many of the father issues are so deeply embedded in the work we have to do together.
Right.
Because they had a father who was distant or who was critical or who was weak, and their relationship, not only to him, I mean, he's more like, I try to help them to heal their relationship with their father to the extent that it's possible. But the big thing about it is that they have a very damaged relationship to masculinity and to themselves because there's still this like hurt child in a lot of ways. And so one of the things that, because I had a very similar dynamic with my father, and I didn't realize it. And the way I fixed my relationship with my father, which is like amazing now, but was really, I mean, it was bad. Like it was very bad. It was very just critical, and, you know, definitely never made me feel like I was good enough. And we had to have some really tough conversations a decade ago about it. And what you find out is that the fathers who are like this, they're like it because of their own shit that they got very often from their parents. Like in the case of my father, for instance, a son of like socialite parents who never were around, you know, dropped off the nanny, dropped off at camp. He never had any attention. Right. And so there was this sense of almost inadequacy. And once you realize that your father actually loves you, but his way of trying to relate to you is just, it's not good. Like it's bad. It's self-destructive.
Yeah.
Then you actually become the father, and then you have to father him into a different relationship.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing the results. I mean, the number of guys who have spoken to their fathers, maybe they haven't they stopped speaking to them, or they had a very cold relationship with them.
Right.
And then it's just like, they get a glass of whiskey and they start to talk to them about it for Thanksgiving, and it's just like, it's powerful stuff.
Yeah, no, it really is. That's actually really important. Because your dad's just a guy.
Yeah.
And that's when I was younger, I mean, I didn't get along with my dad at all. I mean, they were not prepared for me.
Yeah.
And I have very normal parents, and they were not prepared for me. My dad had me when he was 20. So he's only 20 years older than I am.
Yeah.
And, so they didn't know how to handle this. And, we had a lot of problems. And then I think on his part, he came to a level of maturity, I think, in his 30s, where he was like, okay, this is my kid. The rest doesn't matter. Do I want to have a good relationship with my kid, or do I not? And
Yeah.
so kind of made that step, like, I'm okay, this is how I'm going to handle this, rather than just trying to be constantly like forcing me into his box.
Yeah.
And so he tried, and now, because I've changed a lot since then, and now we talk once a week. He's probably the person I talk to most. He's not a reader, so he actually doesn't even read my work, but like he follows me on Instagram and like watches everything I do. And it's really, really positive. And it gives me a lot of advice as well,
Yeah.
So it's sad when you see guys who they've never repaired that relationship, and they have no relationship with their father at all. I mean, sometimes you probably just shouldn't, because he's just a bad guy.
Sure.
But most of the time, that's not.
Him, though. You still have to forgive him, even if that's the case, though, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they have to move on. Otherwise, they're like the male equivalent of a stripper, right? I mean, like.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not up to you it's up to both of you if the relationship's going to get repaired.
Right.
But you have to become at peace with it.
Yeah. And, at some point, I think I've written before, actually, like, people have to, dudes without fathers, or who don't have a relationship with their fathers, have to become their own fathers.
Mm-hmm.
You have to run the show, or, hire someone to help, or find someone who's a mentor or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
People wallow in that. I had a bad relationship with my dad or my mom or whatever, and they wallow it for their whole lives. And like, that drives me crazy when I see people who let, the first 15 years of their lives dictate the whole rest.
It's like, what a waste.
Yeah.
Because you stay stuck in that pattern, and then you can't move on from it. You can't evolve. I think a lot of the issues, though, are stemming from the fact that on a broader societal level, you could just even argue that the father energy has declined so much. So there needs to be, like, I think a lot of the coaching and mentoring, and certainly in the work that I do, is trying to like bring that back out from guys. And I don't want to beat a dead horse. I mean, we know the same sort of themes, and I'm sure you talked about it with plenty of other people on this podcast, but about masculinity, et cetera, in society. There's definitely this downstream effect where you feel these guys, it's just, they're completely depolarized.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of good role models, not a lot of direction, but there are some out there, and it is cool. There was really no one talking about this in a positive way like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Not very many people at all. And then now you're seeing some guys who really have some life experience and so forth get into the game. We were hanging out. We had John Fitch was there, and it's a totally different frame coming from, and there's a lot of guys, military guys, who are like being like, hey, there's a problem in the world now, and getting in on that, and that's really good to see, because they add something to the picture.
Yeah. And, there's always Jack Donovan too, paving the way. Dude, I read your book years ago before I met you. It was so influential. So
Cool.
yeah.
Cool. That's always great to hear. That's neat. Sometimes people have said, like, do you ever get tired of hearing that? And I was like, no. If I do, that's a rich man's problem.
Yeah, right.
You know, that's a terrible thing. But you were talking about energy a little bit.
Yeah.
And we had talked that we were going to discuss a post that you made that I really liked, that then kind of put something in perspective for me.
Mm-hmm.
For some things, various people that I've had to deal with in the past. And you made a post called "In Defense of Rollo Tomasi," and obviously I don't want to talk about Rollo at all, because there's no point in that. But it was a really interesting post to me because it wasn't about him so much as about energy and about anger,
Mm-hmm.
and about people who are broken and who seek somebody out who can then make them angry, and that's being angry. I think you said in the post, like, being angry is better than being sad and wanting to kill yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a step up. And so they're being angry and they have a sense of purpose and they're going to go fight something and they're going to be mad. But then, a lot of the people, this is in every segment of society, you can really see this. There's a job of guys who just get guys riled up.
Yeah.
It's just, they spin up that energy, but for them to keep their jobs, they have to keep those guys mad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what you were saying in that post, is that these people have to keep these guys angry and in an unhealthy place, so they can't really grow and get beyond being angry and being sad and be successful and happy.
Yeah.
Which is better.
And they don't necessarily have to do that, but that's how those guys are behaving in that sort of level. So they're taking guys who are at this suicidal apathy, my life is falling apart, and then they're moving them to a higher energy frequency of like anger, pride, like basically a very sort of aggressive. It's still very victim oriented. I wouldn't say it's particularly like courageous or anything like that.
Right.
But there's a sense of strength around it. Now, what would be great is if there was that there was also a movement to like move them through that stage and then move them out of it. A lot of them get stuck there for various reasons. That's not necessary. I think it's just part of the culture around that segment of the community, that there's like there's a negative. And I think because some of the leaders there are stuck at that level, they're actually afraid of moving up themselves. And so they block the other people who have followed them and paced them from moving further up. But one of the things in that post that I noticed, I mean, because I was thinking about it, is like, well, because just a very, very brief backstory. I mean, me and him have just had some beef about ideas and stuff, red pill, etc. He doesn't like me very much. I don't have any real ill will towards him, but I noticed that our markets actually didn't really conflict too much. In fact, we probably were good for each other's business, although I don't know that he'd ever admit that. But not that I think for either of us, at least for me, that was any intention going into it. But the guys who I work with are very, very rarely anywhere close to that level. They might be they might have had a similar tragedy happen to them, but they're looking for a way to sort of get out of it and to jump out of it, to kind of go to a different experience of life. They're not grabbing onto this like piece of driftwood, this idea that's like, this is the new truth, this is going to make me feel powerful. Yeah. They're looking to there's a lot of introspection and a lot of I'm going to take some risks. I'm going to be a little bit more vulnerable. So they're moving to a higher vibration standpoint, right? So we're talking about this book by Dodson, Levels of Energy.
This book.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of the things that I wrote in that post, there were ideas that I was kind of developing, but someone on my email list sent me a PDF of that book randomly. It's like, I really think that you'll had an intuition you'd really get a lot out of this book. And it was like, man, this is like saved me years of thinking. It's like got everything already like layered out for me. And the basic gist of that book is talking about levels of sort of vibrational energy and how, and it's similar to the Hawkins scale. Hawkins is another author. And you basically have, low vibration and, mid-high vibration, right? The big shift point is when you move into courage. Right. Courage is the beginning of sort of higher vibration living, which goes all the way up to like, optimism and rationality and love and abundance, right? As you go further and further up. So the reality though, and this is why I said in defensive of Rollo Tomassi, is because he actually, I believe that he has probably saved a lot of guys' lives because they were at the very bottom and he was able to pace them at that very bottom point. And I don't think that I'm as good as doing that because I like being in that level. Yeah. You have to, Dodson talks about this, like getting yourself into different vibrational levels. Like he says, like when he was writing the book, he'd like change his environment around to like influence his vibrational area that we could, it's kind of, it's kind of whatever. It's kind of weird, but yeah.
No, that's interesting. Yeah. I mean, I definitely, I can tell what you're talking about. I mean, cause I get messages from guys all the time. And there are some guys, and I can think of one personally right now is popping in my head who I have dealt with in person. And because I've had enough bad experiences in the past, I'm like, I can't help you where you are. Like I can't, you're too angry. You're too unstable. Yeah. You are now a powder keg for me. Like you can, whatever you do can explode on me, and, there are certain people who can deal with that. And I can't, that's not helping me to go down into that space with those guys.
Social work is such a brutal job because you're constantly dealing with those people. And the way that sort of vibrational stuff works, I mean, obviously you can build up your own barriers if you get really, really grounded. Right. But you are constantly getting pinged by your environment. Yeah. And if you are surrounded by negative people all the time, and actually this is why people who work in like hospitals or social work, they, from what I've understood about them, they tend to go in two directions. They either get just really serious and depressed and have issues themselves, or a lot of them have a really wicked sense of humor about the people that they work with. Okay. And it's like, to a lot of people on the outside, it's like, oh my God, that's so terrible that you talk about these people like that. It's like, you have to have that attitude in there, like humor, which is a very high vibration orientation. You have to almost hold all of this bullshit lightly in order to be able to not be drowned in it. Yeah. But I find it very interesting because what Dodson talks about, and I've seen this bear out in experience, is moving up this sort of vibrational scale. One of the things he says in it, first off, I thought was really interesting. He talks about low vibration is that you are what you have. Okay. So people define themselves by the things they have, like their possessions, right? Their status. Mm-hmm. And then as it moves up to mid vibration, it's a lot of like, you are what you do, which, I mean, maybe for a lot of people who are listening to this, that's like, well, that of course you are what you do. Like, right. That makes sense. Cause like your actions define who you are and your results. Sure. But the higher level of that is you are what you are. Right. And this is, it's like peeling back all the layers of things that you have to do in just the true sort of essence. And this is when you get into like woo-woo kind of language.
Yeah. And that can be tricky with people because I can already see someone thinking that they're at that level, but they need to go through the other level first, because what happens is then you have people who are like, I'm amazing just the way I am. And actually, no, you've never done anything in your life and you're whatever. But
yes. Yeah. And so you get delusional
people, but yeah.
Well, you see this a lot with, that famous book, The Secret.
Right? Yeah.
The Secret is talking about, I haven't actually read The Secret, but from what I understand about it,
it sounds horrible.
It's just a law of attraction. I think it's a pretty simple
Yeah,
Simple
yeah.
concept.
Right.
If you're at a high vibration, things will start to come to you, right? That's
Right.
the idea of it.
Yeah,
But a lot of people who are reading it aren't at a high vibration. So
yeah.
stuff is coming. Like you look at it like a magnet,
Yeah.
and you have to, and honestly, to magnetize yourself in almost all cases, you have to be out and doing things. I think the do be distinction is
Yeah.
that, and you see this a lot in the manosphere, which is like hardcore focus on discipline. And I am not anti, I mean, discipline is a necessary thing. But what I found is that if you have a difficulty in doing something, then that is mostly because there's a lack of alignment somewhere. So there's something that you're trying to have yourself do that part of you isn't on board with. And so I can say for me, just telling myself, you have to do this, you have to do this, it didn't work very well. I know,
Yeah.
I think for some guys, I think it works better than others. Some
Right.
guys are able to push their way through it.
Yeah.
And then by doing it, they're like, actually, I feel better. And that's cool. It didn't work for me. And I know it hasn't worked for a bunch of other guys too, in that what we've had to do is basically go in and find what is the part that's holding you back, and then kind of have some sort of reconciliation with that and
Yeah.
let it go. And then things start to flow very naturally, and then it becomes very easy to produce and to accomplish, and things just tend to happen. Really, it's very interesting.
Yeah. I don't like to live in a world of no.
Yeah,
Personally, I don't want to be like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I got, like
yeah,
that's not my personality. I'd rather live in a world of yes. And I had to do that when I quit drinking for like 5 months this summer because it was getting a little too much.
yeah.
And the reason what I had to do is kind of go back into my own identity and be like, uh, this part of me that thinks this is an important part of my identity, I have to deal with that because it isn't. Like no one
Yeah,
cares. No
yeah,
one cares about this part of my identity but me.
yeah,
And I still, and I drink again now, and I keep an eye on it, but it is part of, I can't be married to this idea of myself as like I'm Jack Donovan, I drink Negronis, like
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
because no one cares. No, literally no one cares about that. That's not what they come to me for. That's not what they care about. And that's just my own like little thing. And so everybody has stuff like that they have to go back and fix to kind of get something out of their way.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important.
Yeah, these various parts. Like I can say that for me, it was there was a part of me that like because I had told myself, you have to do this, you have to do this, you're not good enough, which was internalized stuff, from my childhood, stuff with
Yeah.
my father, stuff with other kids. And so that internalized lesson, that loop, I was basically becoming all those externalized critical figures in my head against like the child part of me. So you have these
Right.
two parts, and it was basically like a bullying loop. And so I did some very weird stuff to sort of get to the root of this. And I basically, because this child part, so to speak, it's what I call it, it would self-sabotage constantly, just would not allow me to do anything unless there was a serious fear pressure behind it. And so eventually I was like, you know what? Like I'm done fighting it. Like you have the reins. What do you want to do? And I allowed myself to go on this like ridiculous bender.
Yeah.
Where like I, ate like shit, did not take care of myself at all, got shit faced, played video games, looked at porn, just like the worst. It was just a disgusting week. And I just kept kind of asking myself, like, why do you want to do this? Right? Why do you want to do this?
Right.
And I found out that child part of me just fucking hated being with me because I was so mean to it all the time. And so I spent, since then, it's like, it basically wanted me to die. Like that was basically what it was trying to do. So now I had to it was like a relationship. I had to repair it. I had to manage and lead myself better. And so when I set a goal for myself, like I set a very, very big financial goal, December 29th last year.
Okay.
And then January, like I put it out there, and I was like, even when I put it out there, I'm like, I don't know if I'm really on board with this.
Right.
January 2nd, I'm like, that is not the goal anymore, because that part of me doesn't want to do it. It would be like forcing it from an ego perspective. It's not an alignment.
Right.
And so now I just constantly check in with that, and things move smoothly and move very, very quickly, actually. But I have to check in constantly.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess, sometimes, a little bit of this and a little bit of that works too. It's, the part that says you have to go to the gym even when you don't want to.
Yeah.
That's still just discipline and shut up and do it and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I definitely do that, and you always feel better.
Always feel better. I find discipline tactically is really, really useful. There's like certain moments where you're like, you got to throw the discipline at yourself. Like, no, we're going.
Exactly. But sometimes there are deeper issues that you also have to address.
Yes.
See where the desire is to do things is coming from.
Mm-hmm.
It actually reminded me a little bit. I had to look it up on my phone because I have one of those meditation things. Are you familiar with the Dr. Joe Dispenza or whatever?
Oh, I'm not. That name is familiar to me.
Okay. No, yeah. Somebody just recommended to me actually while I was in Poland at the 21 there. One of the photographer guys actually was, because he was talking about, I was, exploring different types of meditation, and he's a big meditation guy. Similar concept to, the whole visualization thing of like his whole thing is basically that you have to emotionally experience what it's like on the other side, and then it brings things to you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So a little bit like The Secret kind of thing, but a little bit better, but still, still a little hocus pocusy. Not, some things he says are great, and some things he says, I'm like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah, man. I've been hearing there's been something, I haven't tried it yet.
Right.
But there's been some stuff going on in esoteric circles on Twitter.
Yeah.
That
sounds like that's the most hilarious sentence ever. Esoteric circles on Twitter. What is less esoteric than Twitter?
Man, I mean, some of the shit I read on there is one of the things was that when because there's obviously a huge amount of sexual energy that gets built up, during sex or whatever. In general, sexual energy is very important for your ability to draw things to you, right? Your field.
Sure.
So they're saying that, okay, talking about visualizations, etc. But if you visualize or really like put out that you want something right as you're orgasming,
right,
that's like almost like a magic spell.
Okay.
And it creates a massive surge of energy for that manifestation out there. So maybe something to try. I don't know.
Yeah. I could see that. Yeah. Interesting. I mean, to get back to the whole energy thing with men and turning them up and everything. I just wanted to make it clear that it's just not about that scenario.
No.
I mean, there's something that. Are you familiar with the term thumos?
I am familiar. I forget what it means, but I've heard it before.
Yeah, it's a Greek word. I mean, it has a few different meanings, but I first encountered it through the book Manliness by Harvey Mansfield.
Yeah, okay.
And he writes, he kind of pulls from Plato and a few other things. That's the guardian spirit, and it kind of translates directly to spiritedness.
Okay.
But also can be related to anger. And just high emotion and so forth, and you can get, and that's something I've seen, and there's a good way to use it and a bad way to use it, and it just depends on sometimes the outcome. Like sometimes you can't control it, because I mean that's what every Maximus speech, every football speech, everything is like stirring these guys up, like all right. Now's the time. If not now, when? If not us, who?
Yeah.
like, can you believe them? Can you believe those people? Can you believe that injustice?
Right.
Are you going to stand for this? Are you going to go out and fight? And dudes get boners everywhere. Like they get the violence boner going, and it doesn't matter if you're really at the lowest point in your life, or you can take a well-adjusted group of guys and
And you
turn them
put
up.
it in that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean this is how you lead men into battle. I mean, it's like that
Yep.
basic band of brothers speech, the whole from Shakespeare. There's a way that you can stir up thumos in men, and it's a very it's a pretty tight formula, really, if you look at it, how you do it. But you can do that, and I think you have to be, once you have that ability to do that, you have to do it very responsibly.
Yes.
And because there are good causes, there are good reasons to be angry, and there are good reasons to fuck these people, we're gonna go after, all right, this is the right thing to do right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's part of masculinity, a healthy masculinity. But you do have guys, and across the spectrum in all professions, who capitalize that on that anger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's a fun game. Spin guys up while I drink my glass of Chardonnay and have them go get in trouble.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna relax and you guys go have that fight.
Yep.
Yeah, and I've seen it a lot of fringe political groups and all kinds of things where like someone wants to make a name for themselves. Let's get a bunch of guys angry and throw them at a problem and see what happens.
Or to entrap people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. And so I think it's a broader concept, and that's why that's why your post on that interested me so much, because it got me thinking about it more, because it's something relates to masculinity, and it's part of what men are.
And I'm very, very careful about how I let myself get into that state, because I can feel my discernment starting to get really sharp, and I can see when there's like a manipulation behind it.
Yes.
It's like, why is this person is telling me something that is designed to get me angry? Yeah. And so what is his agenda for trying to get me angry? Right. If it's like, if the more versus like the more organic, natural form of it, like you go back, like you've got your tribe, right? Another tribe comes after you. They maybe take one of the guy's women, they rape her or something like that.
Yeah.
You and your crew,
yeah,
you're going to get some really legitimate, righteous thumos going on.
Exactly.
To go and fight. Yeah. It's not some rando who comes over and is like, they want to, another tribe that didn't do anything to you ever. It's like, you got to go over there and kill them. You got to be like, wait, why are you telling me to do this? Right.
Yeah. I mean, you could put it
it's agit propaganda.
Yeah. I mean, you could take, you put it in a World War II perspective. You get a whole bunch of people in a bad economic situation, get them stirred up.
Oh yeah.
Somebody that they don't like already anybody anyway, let's go. This is the problem, Yeah. And the same thing with a lot of other situations. I think there's a lot of guys. I think the easiest example of thumos that I can think of is 9/11.
Yeah.
A lot of guys enlisted after 9/11, like right away. And that was, the positive thumos thing. Now, whether they got played later, we don't know. I don't get involved in all that. I try to stay out of the architecture of the towers and all that shit. But I'm not an architect. I'm not involved in that.
Yeah.
That's not my business.
We'll just gloss over that one. That's
I don't know. But the point is, I mean, that's how wars get started. That's how you do it.
And it's a shame in the case of when a war isn't just, it is a real shame, because it doesn't diminish, I think, that the righteousness of those people and what they were.
No, they're still good guys.
The intention of where it was coming from for them. It's just sad when you see that stuff manipulated. But as you said, it's a tale as old as time. I mean, that's.
Oh, totally. And we never know. It's like, because history is written by the victors, so it's good when it works out, and it's bad when it doesn't.
And I think women have their own version of it. I don't know. Maybe the Greek word for it, but especially when it comes to, when it comes to like people being hurt or people being injustices put against people. Basically, I think that you can really manipulate. That's kind of like thumos is kind of like channeling this sort of, it's very, very masculine. It's very like paternal, almost sort of like energy. And I think that you can also manipulate the maternal in And women,
Yeah.
I mean, I think you see it a
Well,
lot
yeah,
to
you get the
women are
whatever
getting manipulated.
caged lioness, or like the mama bear in a corner kind of thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, actually, yeah, you're totally right. That's what's being done. On a grand scale in society, you have politicians, I think, especially manipulating women in the media because you could put a child somewhere is suffering.
Yeah.
Therefore, major decisions have to be made so no child ever suffers again, which is
Yeah.
not realistic and not like the way the world works. But that's literally the goal that they put out there. Never
Mhm.
again, always. And they get women stirred up. Like,
Yeah.
let's protect the children is the easiest way to get them turned on.
And the smart gamble, at least for a while for them,
Yeah.
was that the men didn't want to upset the women by pushing against that manipulation.
Right.
And so then you get like a clear coastway for it.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's a that's a bigger problem. Just because it's
Anyway.
yeah. There's a lot of, I always say there's a lot of, you'll never not make money by not flattering women. Like
Right.
if, like that's they spend a lot of the money, and so that's where it's easy to throw money at and so forth. But that's unfortunate, and that's just the way that society's organized right now.
Right.
And it's not anyone's fault. And I think you made a post about that. I'm going to see if I have it, a title for it. Oh, well, you were talking about male spaces, which is also something that's really, really important to me, because I don't think masculinity can happen properly unless men are able to interact as men without the interference of women.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Looking over their shoulder, telling, because man, I've stood around fires and in groups with so many guys, and it's like, I know what you said when she wasn't here.
Yeah.
And then you can see dudes actually looking over their shoulder, like to make sure what they're saying is okay. To see, and I don't know that it's actually that they think that the woman is a better judge of what they're saying, but how much bullshit they're going to have to deal with later for saying it.
Right.
And so they're just kind of playing a game. And unfortunately, what that means is that you have males interacting in a way that isn't honest, with each other. They're not actually being honest to each other because they're getting your girlfriend's filter.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate, and it really prevents them from bonding and trusting each other properly. Because how can you trust this guy? Because whatever he's saying is like what he's allowed to say.
Masculinity has to grow in those spaces.
Exactly. Yeah. You made a post about the lack of male spaces on your site and in friendships, actually. And I think with the context of it, where you were saying that, I guess it was an article, I didn't read it, that women were complaining that men didn't have any friends.
It was the best title for like one of these articles.
Yeah.
Like men don't have any friends, and women are suffering because of it. It's like always goes back to it, right?
Yeah. What did you bastards do to women now?
And of course, the kind of silly thing about the entire premise of the article was that women, a lot of these women, I don't want to generalize all women because I don't actually, in my experience, like the women in my life, like they're totally okay with male spaces and they encourage independent friendships. So it's not
lots of women are
problem.
Yeah.
But I have definitely seen it where women will get really, they would try to contain their guy. They wouldn't want their guy to go off with other friends, or if they did, everyone would have to be in a group together. There was never any ability to have some one-on-one time or just male only time. And then what happens is that then the guy becomes basically, well, his male friendships start to really suffer because to the extent that he has guy friends, they're like contained in couple contexts. Right. But then the girls would have their own friends, and then the guy was weak. And so the women were complaining basically that, well, these guys are weak and like really socially dependent on me, and they should have had some guy friends. But even in the article, when they were saying like they should have guy friends, it was again contained, that like in certain sort of contexts, and so that they should only be
Whenever
talking
I
about
say,
yeah, you know,
yeah.
it's just super, I mean, honestly, just like control freaks is really what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said that from an evolutionary perspective, I mean, that is their imperative. That's the way they're wired. Hey,
Yeah.
I'm going to get this guy and access all of his resources and
Mm-hmm.
all of his time. I mean, that makes perfect sense from their perspective because I might become pregnant at any time. And so I need this dude to be totally devoted to me, 100%. And I think obviously we don't live in that world where that's necessarily the problem that they have to deal with. But that's the thing about evolutionary psychology, is that it's not about the world we live in now. It's about the world we're evolved for.
Well, this is a good kind of like connection, because we were talking about energy and vibration before.
Yeah.
So one of the ideas that I've been thinking a lot about is that women are by nature succubi, right? A succubus is like an extreme version of it, but that they
Yeah.
are actually, and that they look what they're drawn for in men. Because if you want to get down to a very granular, like base level, because you have like a guy who's like a criminal, right? And then you have a guy who's like powerful, sort of patriarch. It's like women are drawn to these guys, like, well, these are different guys, right? What's going on here? What women are drawn towards is life force, drawn to energy.
Mm-hmm.
And they scan guys for energy. And what you see that happens, because energy is required in the production of a child. And so a guy with a strong life force is going to have strong
with big dick energy, basically.
Yeah, big dick energy.
They're
Big
looking
dick
for
energy.
BDE. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they're very, very finely attuned to it. And it explains the scenario where you have a guy, nothing, average dude, and then a couple of good things start to happen with him. He kind of is like a little bit maybe more on his routine. He gets a good opportunity and things are starting to flow, and he's feeling like good, he's feeling good about his life. Things are on the upswing, and immediately a girl's like in his life grabs him. And this happens all the time. And the guy is really excited because the girl like really wants his dick, and he's never really had a girl who's been like treated him like that before.
Right.
The girl chooses him. He doesn't have any agency. He's not aware of what he had at that moment.
Right.
And of course, because he wasn't aware, he allows her to basically drain him entirely. And my sort of understanding now is that a healthy relationship with a woman is a woman takes her cut, right? But she knows not to, pick up, she knows not to like raid the entire pantry. And she actually, in a lot of ways, will help you to grow your energy further.
Right.
Because she knows that as you grow and expand, she gets more. And that's kind of how I've seen these relationships go, and why you see these different strategies for women. For a lot of women, they don't maybe trust that a guy's going to be around, or they just know that they can take everything from the guy. And of course, once they take everything from him, they discard him. They're no longer interested.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. And I think like those guys on the upswing, I would you say that you have to be in a spot for a while to know how to manage it?
I think, to be honest, I mean, theoretically, anybody could learn, right? They could become aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think most guys only become aware once they get burned.
Right. Okay.
Because then they're like, man, she just totally took everything from me. And sometimes it's like physical assets. Sometimes it's just all of your emotional energy. You're broken. Right. And then afterwards, there's a little bit more of a protective barrier that goes up. For at least a lot of guys will question that experience and try to learn from it. But if you're a guy who has never had happen, you've never had a girl before who is really about you like that, I think that the flood of emotions is, practically speaking, too much for most to handle.
Right. So as an older guy, I've watched this happen a few times, and then you can say, well, you know what's going to happen. Yeah. Here's the way this is going to go down. Yeah. And they're like, no, it's different. But then it happens.
And that's one of the reasons that older guys, I think, are more often attractive to women.
Right.
At least from because to be fair, women love to fuck a young, attractive guy.
Sure.
Right. No, there's no question about that. I think that gets glossed over a lot when we talk about like women like older guys, but an older guy manages his energy better.
Right.
And so the fact that, and when a guy puts up the boundaries, it actually makes a woman drawn more to it, because then she knows that this energy source is not going to deplete very quickly. So it actually makes her feel a little more safe and secure that she could be with that guy, because she knows she's going to get a cut, or at least she knows that the bank's not going to be empty. Right.
Interesting. No, I like that. That's actually a good way to use that energy theory, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I've talked to a lot of guys. I have a friend who's an older guy, and yeah, I mean he has no problems with women at all.
Yeah.
Because he's figured out. Because I think when he was younger, he got burned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to a certain point where they don't need anything. Like you have everything in your life handled, and then they're like, well, here's what I want. Here are my boundaries and whatever. And then you, like you said, women are attracted to that because they know what's going on.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. And I had actually written down another post that you had done about the heuristic for dating being 50+7. Which is I just kind of went through your whole site like last night, and I was like, what have you written out about? And yeah, that fits into that pretty perfectly.
Yeah, that was one of my more, I would say, intellectual posts, mind heavy posts, versus maybe more of an intuitive one. But that I was trying to find this compromise between the biological realities between men and women, but also psychological compatibility. And there's definitely something to be said. I mean, you girl who's like 20 years old, 18 years old. I mean, beautiful girl, right? Be very, very beautiful girl, very young, very fertile, right? All the biological things are there. But I've always wondered a bit. I don't think it's always the case, to be fair. There's always exceptions to this, but I've always wondered a bit about the 45, 50-year-old guys who are like obsessive about trying to get with college girls. And I feel like there's some sort of stunted development there.
Yeah.
That maybe they didn't get it when they were younger, because a girl like that can't relate to anything that's going on with you right now. So, and yeah, there can be some really good polarity. You're kind of like the dad.
Sure.
And a lot of hot shit can come from that.
Yeah,
but when it comes to a partnership, I found that girls in their late 20s, I think it starts to scale. And there's this period in your 20s where your maturity starts to your identity really starts to solidify quite quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you get to the late 20s as a girl, I think it's much more sticky over a longer period of time as a guy gets older. So 50+7, right?
Right.
50-year-old guy, 32-year-old woman, right? 18-year guy.
That
of course,
yeah.
Rules are meant to be broken. It's just a heuristic.
Yeah. I mean, and that's all these things. I mean, the energy thing, whatever. I mean, that's what I was looking through it. As I, understand more about things in life and so forth. You can look at all these things. You're like, well, do I really believe in energy fields? I don't really know, but you can look at the like the questions he's asking in the category, and it's just a way of understanding. We make models of the mind so we can understand things, and that's what myth is, and that's what psychology is, and everything. And that's it's just it's a framework, and then you can kind of test it as a heuristic. Like, okay, well, does this work? Is this workable? It's a workable model, not necessarily an objective truth, but this workable model, it works most of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And you got to hold these models lightly. Like for instance, one of the models that I've used in my practice is Myers-Briggs personality typing. Like right. I like it. I think it can be useful for me to shortcut to understand someone's psychology. Sometimes it's not a useful shortcut. Sometimes, and I'll catch myself. In the past, I was like, no, really, what type is this person? I'm trying to like figure it out. It's like, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because now the model has failed to produce, help me. Now I'm trying to fit the person into the model rather than using the model to help me understand the person.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, we talked earlier about talking about psychology a little bit. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any? What were we going to talk about as far as that goes? You want to?
Okay, so I'm going to take in this angle because you talked about energy manipulation, energy fields. So we
Yeah,
can maybe bridge into that. So I sort of mentioned a little bit at the very beginning of this podcast. I've had my foot in two different worlds a bit, just because I like
sure.
the contrast of it. So I have a foot in very like spirituality circles, and I have a foot in the manosphere. I'm more in the manosphere. I feel more at home there, more in touch with the culture.
Right.
Right? But I like to explore this sort of hippie spirituality world because I find there's a lot of aspects of it uh, that are perhaps ignored in the manosphere, right? So one of these things has to do with, so when I'm out in these communities and people are able to do things with like energy manipulation, and I've seen it and I've experienced it.
Hmm.
And part of it's like, oh, how much of it is psychosomatic? But there's a different gradient, let's just say, of experience where you can feel that, someone can superheat a leaf, right? And you can touch the leaf and it's a lot hotter. They've just simply directed energy towards it. There's very
Okay.
interesting stuff like that. But one of the things in a lot of the stuff that they do a lot of like psychology work and stuff. But one of the one of the things that I've noticed there is that they'll talk about masculine, feminine dynamics,
Right.
but the overarching framework is very, very feminine.
Yeah.
Very, very, I mean, just over like 80% women there. And then out of the men, half of them are just completely depolarized. Like there's just, now, I don't know how familiar you are with the work of David Data. He wrote the book, The Way of the
I'm
Superior.
familiar with the book. Yeah, I've never. I don't think I've read it the whole way through, but
Well, I've been really interested about this because you are like one of the foremost thought leaders on masculinity.
cool.
And so I see a lot of the stuff that they do. Like, I think it's very, very valuable. It's very high vibration stuff. It gets very deep into people's, childhood parts and whatnot, and whatever the energy shit, fine. But creating creating these sort of retreats in these spaces for guys that integrate spirituality,
Right.
that integrate a masculine aspect to it. What has been your experience with this? Is this something that you've been, because Data talks in sort of terms of like having like a masculine edge in that sort of spiritual context. I'm just wondering, I know, especially because you're out in the Pacific Northwest, right, which is definitely, you have a lot of exposure to those people around you.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so I mean, how would you cultivate something like this, like, but a masculine version? And
Um,
what are the barriers?
well, actually, there has to be. I think the thumos thing is actually a good barrier because that's one of the things. Like, I mean, in ritual and so forth rituals that I've done. I mean, yeah, you can tap into that warband energy,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get men turned up. And like I said, you just have to be responsible about where you turn it to.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you turn something like that towards self development and self improvement, then it can be really positive. But you're still accessing that spiritedness,
Yeah.
that anger, because like I think the mistake that the mythopoetic movement, men's movement, made in the '90s, and you hear a lot about it, is the joke. And this was, it's not fair because if I read it in the New York Times about whatever, they had their take on it,
Mm-hmm.
but the joke was, it's a bunch of dudes sitting around in a drum circle talking about their feelings.
Yeah.
And I never want to talk about my feelings in a large group of men. That is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a trust issue, and I don't think that that's always the best place for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when you're doing trust, that's a shoulder to shoulder thing, and you want to interact on a personal level with someone you actually trust, and not just like, hey guys, I know you just met me, but I had a problem with my father when I was 10. You don't want to do shit like that. You know, that, and I think that that's one of the mistakes that they made from what I hear. I mean, I've never been involved with those things, but those events, but I feel like there may be too much emotional sharing with not enough boundaries.
Yes. So one of the things, the word vulnerability, I can get a really bad rap in men's circles.
Oh yeah.
And I understand why. I think this is it's a totally semantic issue.
Totally. Yeah. Because I'll word nerd on it real hard. Because I know what it means. But yeah, it does get, I know, go ahead. Say what you're going to say.
No, just real. So the way women deal with vulnerability is a way of connecting with others.
Right.
By going out and like sharing, you know, this is how I feel. And it's just emotional relating. And when a guy does that to other guys, there's no masculine charge to it. And when it does it to women, it's just disgusting. Like they don't care about it at all.
Yeah.
A guy being vulnerable about a problem, something he's been working through, but not from the position of like, I'm a victim, but like, hey, this is what I've been fighting.
Yeah.
And like also speaking to the truth of something that maybe other people there are dealing with.
Sure.
That is more of like a leadership. It's like taking a big risk. You're putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
And you're taking real extreme ownership over your situation. I think it's a completely different experience. It actually creates a courageous sort of aspect for men to drop their own fears.
Oh yeah.
And be like, yeah, I got to deal with this shit.
Yeah. I think there has to be a place, you know, someone who you're talking to while you're figuring out, while you're struggling with it. And if you're in a bad place, that's a high trust environment that you need to be in.
Yeah.
And then, when you're on the other side of the hump there, then you can be like, hey, I dealt with this problem and here's my solution that I'm working on.
Yeah.
That's a very masculine perspective to come from it. But the like, I don't know what to do, I'm scared is bad. You know, and so you want to deal from it from a position of strength. Yeah, and the same thing. I think I want to look through. We were talking about mythopoetic men's movement and so forth. That's my project for next week, actually, for the book that I'm writing. I want to go through King, Magician, Warrior, Lover, and I want to go through it. I've read parts of it before and so forth, and I'm familiar with it. But I want to go through it and find the parts I don't like about it. You know, like I already know the parts that I like, but you know, there's a lot of things from the psychotherapy movement and so forth that do come from a very feminine frame.
Yeah.
You know, and we were talking about Jung a little bit, and I feel that he's got a very feminine frame when you dig deep enough into what he's, you know, like your true self, you know, is brought to you by a woman. You know, like that's like there's a very feminine frame there. And so I think a lot of that movement is influenced by that. And also, you know, I'm going to sound like a Generation Z kid or whatever right now, but it's kind of boomer. There's a boomer thing. And the boomer thing is basically that these are actual boomers, not just everybody older than me. But, you know, they had the great generation of, you know, dudes who fought in the Great War. And then you have their kids who are a little spoiled and entitled because that's the whole 60s generation, whatever, like the big baby boom. And they have all the opportunity in the world and everything, but they're still mad at dad. And all through feminist literature and all through a lot of this psychological literature, which is all like the same people who went to the same schools at the same time. There's some daddy issues in a lot of it, and it colors it. I mean, I opened it up the other day. I opened up the book, and it said something about like the military isn't an authentic initiation. And I was like, wow, I think it's actually one of the only ones that we have left. You know, you have to go through a hard process, and then you're being prepared for a different role in life. That's actually what initiation is.
Yeah.
You know, that's and those guys get to have that identity for the rest of their lives. Like, I was a Marine or whatever. And you know, so I think that there's a prejudice there from that generation that was mad about Vietnam and mad about their John Wayne dads and all that, and that colors it. And I think it again kind of kills some of the more masculine frame, because, and people are also in that circle seem to be afraid to talk about violence.
Yeah, very
In a
afraid.
positive way, and you cannot really define masculinity in a way that doesn't include violence.
Yeah.
I think that once you're doing that, then you are talking about something else. Like, it's like the ship of Theseus or whatever. Like, if you take, there's only so much you can take apart before it becomes something else. And that's
Right.
violence is a key piece of masculinity. Whether we ever use it or not, it's a part. It's part of
Always
the
there
system.
beneath the surface.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, one of the things I've noticed being out in those circles is that, you know, they'll talk about coming into more of a masculine attitude, right? Where, and I think that there's like a correct general distinction about the feminine being very much about, you know, unconditional love, right? Whereas the
Right.
masculine is much more about, I love you and you need to get this straightened out. Like, you
Right.
need to be better with this, right? Very directive and aligning. But they don't actually create the space where you can really have a masculine energy, because, well, it's a safe space. You can't say certain
Want all
things.
the women would be mad. Yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly. And I don't know how. I wonder what your thoughts are, to the extent, can women enter that state? Some women probably can, right? Some women probably can enter that energy if the men around it really cultivate it. But how does it change the field? That's kind of my question, because I do feel, I'm not certain, but I do feel that the men, even though a lot of them are very depolarized, and they're good people, like, I'm not trashing them or anything, but
Sure.
even though they're in that, I feel like it probably pollutes some of even the feminine field, them sort of being there, because there's a sense that they're not quite fitting into it.
Right.
Would you say it's similar? Because you've created these masculine fields.
Yeah, I've definitely been involved in that kind of stuff, and created that situation, and yeah. I mean, that was always my rule. I mean, I don't allow women to participate in things like that, just because, men, like I said, men censor themselves, and all the ways that they interact, and they don't interact when women are there. Some guys are just like, I always say there's kind of two groups of guys that I deal with, and they have totally different needs. You have guys who are what I always say are my people, which are nerds who needed to learn to punch each other in the face. And then you have guys who have done nothing but that their entire lives.
Yeah.
And they're like, yes, you're right. More people need to punch, so I have the guys giving the affirmative and the guys who are aspirational.
Yeah.
And so the guys who are in the affirmative, they almost need something different, because they've already done all that, or it's like on a train becoming destructive for them.
Right.
Like, there's too much, and I hate to say too much, because that's hypermasculinity and that's a value judgment, and then that's too much for who. But in the sense of I think, regardless, though, I mean, I think women involved in that environment, because it's cruel. I mean, a masculine environment can be cruel, and I'm not a big fan of hazing and initiations and so forth. That's not my jam. That's not what I'm about. I don't like bossing people around. Yeah. That's not my job. But that is kind of part of the masculine thing. And and we've all gone through that. I've gone through that.
Darker side of it that is part of it. That
and women wouldn't tolerate that, because it sounds horrible. The way men talk to each other. I mean, like Australians all call each other cunts, or but that's like the very tip of that.
Yeah.
But like, I think actually Hunter wrote a post, I think recently on, maybe a month ago, saying something like, if I talk shit about you, it's because I like you. If I don't talk shit about you, that's when I really don't like you.
Yeah.
And a lot of men are like that. I mean, I'm not really a shit talker generally, but a lot of men are like that, and they need that space. And especially I think men are lost because a lot of them don't have brothers.
Hmm.
I think men with brothers already started a level up on that game, depending
Yeah.
on if they were close and if they fought a lot or whatever, because they already know how to interact with men in a harsh way.
Hmm.
But men who there's so many single children and men. I mean, I grew up with sisters, and so I had to
Yeah.
learn some of this stuff later in life. A lot of it much later in life, and yeah. So I mean, I think that's something that is lost because you used to have families of like 7 or 8, and there'd be a few boys and they'd work it all out and they'd figure it all out,
Hmm. Hmm.
neighborhood and so forth. But now you just don't have as much of that, so men have to seek that out from each other, and I think that's why those male spaces are so important, because they can't do it
Yeah.
if they can't do it, because that's a big process to go through. Hey, I need to reproduce like 15 years of childhood real quick. Like I need to get all this. I need to be pushed around. I need to find my place in the hierarchy. I need to like be able to handle that. I need to get butt hurt because
Mhm.
I got pushed around, and then I need to work through that. There's all these things that you need to go through, and sometimes it's hard to do that at high speed, and it's definitely hard to do it when women are present.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
I think it would be really harsh, I think, for women to even see a lot of times. But then there's like the guys I said who have already been through all that. A lot of those guys will be authentically themselves 24/7, even when the women
Mhm.
around,
Mhm.
which is almost jarring to watch.
Right.
But and they'll just find a woman who will deal with that, and
Right.
which is great for them, ideally. But
Yeah, I think that when it comes to, like, when we were talking about how guys will go through hazing and that how this is sort of part of the ritual or the initiation, I think that the big question, and this is for a lot of people, I think it goes a little bit deeper than what people, they'll just generalize it like, oh, this is bullying and this is bad,
right,
right? This is bad. But what matters is actually the intention behind it.
yes,
And if the intention is to be cruel, then it's not good. It's not constructive. It's actually destructive,
yeah.
right? But
Well,
if
I think that's the energy of the group.
yeah,
I think it's the total energy of the group, because there's going to be the guy who's just a dick,
yeah,
like he's going to be in the group.
mhm,
That you can't get around that. But if the total group has the energy of bringing people up, then it can be positive. I think a positive experience for people. But and a lot of things that another thing that women actually don't understand most of the time about men is that sometimes the guy on the bottom is just glad to be there.
yeah,
Like, and that's a really thing for women to wrap their heads around sometimes. Like, that guy who they're always picking on, they still like him, and he still wants to be in the club. Like,
right,
he's not one of the big dogs. He doesn't serve any real purpose. I mean, maybe he's just there. Maybe he's just there because he's funny and he tells good jokes. Or maybe
mhm,
he's just there because he cooks well, or he has some other talent that he brings to the table, or, like, maybe he's just there because he wants to be. And a lot of
yeah,
time being in a group, oh, this guy wants to be with us. Okay, cool. Well, we're going to make fun of him, but
showing up,
he's okay with it.
yeah,
He keeps coming back. And you kind of earn guys' respect. Okay, we're making fun of him, but he still keeps coming back. If he's not, there's 2 ways to do that, which is, like, very, 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 beta is the wrong word. It's the word the manosphere would use, but it's not correct. Be like gamma, but it would be like
yeah,
the far low end of the spectrum, the, like upturned hand constantly, where the guy's coming in and constantly seeking approval,
hmm,
and joking about how submissive he is and so forth, and that's awkward.
hmm,
But if you have the guy who just like, you know, everybody's gonna make fun of him, he's gonna throw him a little bit of shit back, and then continue. That can be healthy for him, because maybe that's
hmm.
the spot that he's comfortable with.
And yeah, and then if you have a moment of conflict with like another group, that's an opportunity for him to change his dynamic
To
within.
shine in some way.
Yeah,
Yeah, because everybody has a good talent, like um, like I've had guys who, like, we're not sure about this guy hanging out with us, whatever. But then, yeah, an emergency happens and he just happens to be good at getting cars out of the snow. Or
Yeah.
getting good at he that hits it. I'm like, whoa, you were throwing off some real energy there. Like that. I like you now.
Yeah. Exactly.
Like I wasn't sure about you, but now I like you. I mean, I had a guy that happened with at some point, and and then after that, I'm like, I appreciate him now.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I think I think women, they don't see that though. A lot of times they would just see the cruelty.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why I think, again, they short circuit that program. And it's unfortunate that it becomes so unpopular to create those kind of male spaces,
Mm-hmm.
and that women can be so against it. Which, I mean, I guess, rightfully so, in the sense that, like, a bunch of men get together and start doing stuff that's that's a threat to maybe their interests.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes, if because men, a large group of men who are on the same page, are a powerful force.
Yes. Yes.
You
I mean,
know,
I think that if you want to get more conspiratorial, that there's definitely a push against that, because men who come together are ones that, change things.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
All of history. Yeah,
And that's
that's
what it,
nobody wants too many men in one room on the same page, because I don't
yep.
care what page they're on. That's because they're going to push in a
Yep.
direction, and
Yep.
it doesn't matter what the established powers are. That's going to be a problem.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think this has probably been about an hour at this
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
So let's is there any projects that you're working on in the next, like, month or so, things you want to get out there?
Right now, projects, not so much. I just finished, we were talking about this a little bit before the podcast. I
Right.
just finished my master class.
Okay.
And basically the master class, it's a 14 and a half hour video course. And it covers the entire gauntlet of the stuff that I work on with my clients. So first module is a lot of deep psychology stuff, like inner game, inner critic work. Second module is all about female nature and basically discernment. So like red flags in women, understanding girl game, right? It's something that I don't think a lot of people talk about, is how girls work against men, right? We
Right.
always talk about, how do I get the girl? It's like, well, how does a girl try to get you?
Right.
Because you need to know the defensive aspects of it.
Mhm.
And then module 3 is just all game, all the classic techniques and tactics and strategies. Module 4 is all about bigger dating strategies, so different areas of dating. So if you're doing the online game, if you're at bars, if you're doing day game, how to handle dates. It's basically gives you the full primer for how to go out there and meet women. And the last module is all in relationships, intimacy, and sex, and basically creating a really deep and connected relationship, dealing with conflict and jealousy. So it's a big course and it covers a really wide range of topics, but I did that deliberately rather than split it up, because I found that 80 to 90% of it's going to be useful for guys regardless of where they're at, because of all of how deep we go into each of the topics and the sort of interconnectedness of it. And also, a lot of guys, they go through life cycles. So maybe they're dating now, but they're going to get into a relationship later. Or maybe their relationship isn't in a great place. Maybe their relationship, if it falls apart, they're going to get back out there and date. And it's basically just designed to reorient your entire position towards women. So I'm really proud of it. I'm really psyched about it. And for guys who, I know maybe a lot of people here haven't heard of me, but working with me is a 4-figure investment. And so this is definitely a way for people it's like $500. It's a way for people to have a chance to basically access the conversations I have with clients, and obviously having long-term access to that. So yeah.
Right. Awesome. And where can people find that?
It's going to be at patstedman.com/masterclass.
Okay.
So we can just put a link with it later on. But
Awesome.
yeah.
All right, man.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. I think that was very interesting.
Yeah, it's a good comment.